Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a stack of sources, and they're all pointing towards St. Johns County, Florida.
Right. Specifically, this draft of their 2050 comprehensive plan.
Yeah, this is the big one. The county's blueprint, really, for how it plans to grow, or maybe how it plans to manage growth for the next, 25 years?
Exactly. And this draft, it's brand new, just presented to the Board of County Commissioners on Tuesday, May 20th, 2025.
And today's the 25th, so yeah, fresh off the presses.
So we have sources laying out what the plan actually says, the county side of it, and then,
Mhm.
well, others that are offering some pretty pointed critiques.
Suggesting it might not be quite what a lot of residents were expecting, especially when it comes to handling all that growth the county's been seeing.
Uh-huh. Significant growth is putting it mildly.
So for this deep dive, we're going to try and get our heads around what's in this draft plan. Then we'll dig into the major concerns being raised. Impacts on roads, infrastructure, the environment, community character.
And there's also some analysis looking at potential problems with actually putting this plan into action, implementation gaps, things like that.
It really is that classic tension, isn't it? Planning for the future, dealing with development pressure, and trying to match the vision residents have.
It's a tough balancing act, especially in places growing as fast as St. Johns County. How do you build what you need without overwhelming what you already have?
Right, so let's start with the plan as the county presented it. Sources 3 and 4 lay this out as the long-term vision, right? All the way out to 2050, a 25-year horizon.
That's the framework. And the stated goal, according to Source 3, is pretty clear. Manage growth and development over this next generation using contemporary planning principles is the phrase they use.
And the sources really zero in on what the county is calling the most notable innovation or most significant policy innovation.
Which is this development area boundary, the DAB.
DAB. Okay, what's the core idea there?
The concept, based on sources 3 and 4, is basically drawing a line on the map, a boundary. Inside that line is where they want to manage growth, specifically in areas that already have infrastructure.
So concentrate development where the pipes and roads are already in place to try and limit sprawl.
That seems to be the main goal. And the plan has details. The area inside the DAB needs to accommodate at least 10 years of projected growth. And they plan to formally review this boundary every 7 years.
Okay, 7 years, but what about between those reviews? Can it change?
Yes. And this becomes a sticking point later. Sources 3 and 4 mention specific criteria for expanding the DAB outside that 7-year cycle.
Like what?
Things like projects creating, I think it was 50-plus high-wage jobs, or developing 100-plus workforce housing units, also showing enough infrastructure capacity, being close to water and sewer, and fitting with walkable, compact urban design.
So there are ways to expand it sooner if certain conditions are met.
Right. And the county, according to Source 3, frames this whole DIB approach as a more structured way to manage growth. Keep development focused, reduce sprawl, make services more efficient. It sounds logical on the surface.
They've also made other changes in the document, right?
Yeah.
Moving sections around.
Yeah, some reorganization. Like the objective on controlling urban sprawl got shifted. But more importantly, the language about how you evaluate changes to the comprehensive plan itself has been modified.
How so?
They've apparently moved the specific criteria for evaluating those amendments out of the comp plan document. Instead, it now points to the Land Development Code, the LDC, saying the detailed rules will live there.
So the big vision's in the comp plan, but the real nitty-gritty rules for development proposals or plan changes are supposed to be in this other document, the LDC.
That's the structure they seem to be setting up. The draft also adds some completely new objectives, too, things covering mixed-use development, energy conservation, and community and neighborhood creation.
Okay, so the overall strategy is manage growth using this DID concept tied to infrastructure and delegate the fine-grained rules to the LDC.
Correct. And the county's position, as presented in sources 3 and 4, is that this creates a system that's both adaptable and structured. It balances development needs with protecting the environment and quality of life. That's the picture they're painting.
Okay, but now let's pivot.
Yeah.
Because there's another side to this story. We have another source focused on what it terms a citizen vision, and its take is, well, quite different.
Yeah, this source raises several major red flags. From this perspective, the draft plan looks like it heavily favors developers, potentially at the expense of current residents.
And it argues the plan could seriously undermine infrastructure, environmental protections, and just the general well-being and character of the community.
It really taps into this feeling reflected in Source 1 that the draft plan runs counter to what many residents were asking for, which was basically, hold on, let's slow down the growth until our roads and schools can catch up.
And base future growth decisions on actual community needs, not just, market demand or developer proposals.
Exactly. So let's dive into the specific concerns from Source 1. First off, weakening road congestion as a development barrier.
Okay, what does that mean?
Source 1 points to language connected to Objective A.1.3. They believe this change means that having roads already gridlocked might no longer be a legally strong enough reason for the county to say no to a new development.
Wow. So take away a tool to manage traffic impact.
That's the fear. This source argues it guts a critical mechanism for slowing down overdevelopment. Building could just keep happening even if roads are failing, which, means worse traffic, slower emergency response, just a lower quality of life.
Yeah, anyone stuck in traffic there would understand that concern. What's next?
Incentives for high-density urban infill with little oversight. Source 1 highlights things in Objective A.1.2.7, like potential bonuses allowing up to 25 extra homes per acre or buildings up to 85 feet high.
Bonuses for density, basically.
Right. But the critique is that these incentives promote really high density, labeled as infill, without guaranteeing that the necessary infrastructure improvements, parks, schools, roads, utilities actually come with that specific development.
So the developer gets the benefit of density, but the existing community potentially deals with the fallout.
That's the argument. That it boosts developer profits while residents face more crowded schools, strained services, and again, more traffic.
Okay, and you mentioned the DAB expansion rules earlier. Source 1 takes issue with those too.
Big time. Expansion of the development area boundary, DAB loopholes. They focus on those criteria for expanding the boundary between the 7-year reviews, the 50 jobs, 100 housing units, proximity to water sewer, or that vague other overriding public benefit clause in Objective 8.1.2.
Why is that seen as a loophole?
This source argues the thresholds are too low and too subjective. It makes it potentially easy for developers to push the urban boundary outward, claiming jobs or benefits, even if the infrastructure isn't truly ready. They stress that proximity to pipes isn't the same as actual capacity to handle the new load.
Just being near a sewer line doesn't mean the treatment plant can handle more, for instance.
Exactly. Then there's mixed use and high-density commercial spread. This references Objectives A Part 1 and 2 and A Part 111, which generally encourage mixed-use development and urban infill using flexible standards and density bonuses.
What's the worry there?
Source 1 finds the language too vague, too open-ended. They fear it allows big increases in density and lets developers reduce setbacks, basically cramming more in without clear limits.
Leading to
Potential overdevelopment in areas not designed for it, which means, you guessed it, worse traffic, maybe more flooding from all the hard surfaces, and more school crowding. The source basically says the plan pushes density without the necessary infrastructure checks and balances. They want hard caps, guaranteed infrastructure first, and real compatibility standards.
And this isn't just about the urban core, is it? Source 1 raises concerns about rural areas, too.
Yes. Rural silvicultural protections weakened by PRD loopholes. PRDs, or Planned Rural Developments, under Objective A.1.7, allow denser housing clusters in rural zones if the developer sets aside some open space.
That's okay on the surface. Set aside open space.
But the critique is that this creates a backdoor for suburban sprawl into farmland and forests. Developers can build clustered homes, maybe even apartments, just by checking an open space box. And Source 1 worries that this open space might just be like undevelopable wetlands, not actual usable green space, while the rural character gets eroded.
Source 1 also mentions repetitive loopholes for compatibility.
Yeah, this is a broader point about Objective A.1.4.11. They claim that almost every type of land use change request seems to allow flexibility based on a compatibility review.
And the problem is?
Compatibility is seen as too vague and subjective. It potentially opens the floodgates for rezonings and variances because, the source argues, a developer can spin almost any project as compatible, even if it clashes with the neighborhood or burdens residents with more traffic or noise.
It lacks objective teeth, is the argument.
Pretty much. Then there's the feeling that the plan is prioritizing developer-centric density bonuses. Source 1 lists examples from Objectives A.1.2.7 and A.1.11.3 bonuses for missing middle housing, for including just 10% workforce units for building vertically, even for adding that potentially dubious open space.
And the criticism here.
It's pretty blunt. These bonuses reward developers for doing what this source considers the bare minimum, while existing residents absorb the downsides, the strained infrastructure, traffic, loss of green space, and so on.
Feels like a recurring theme in these critiques. Finally, Source 1 points to weak language in environmental and historic preservation.
Right. They highlight the use of words like may consider, encourage, promote in objectives dealing with environmental and historic resources. A1.1, A1.5.
These aren't binding words, are they?
Not really. That's the concern enforceability. Source 1 argues this non-binding language makes it too easy for development interests to sideline or ignore environmental or historic preservation concerns when they conflict with building plans. The protections lack legal weight.
So if you tie all these critiques together, Source 1 is essentially arguing that these elements in the draft plan actively work against what residents want, which is infrastructure catching up before more growth happens and growth decisions based on community need.
Exactly. They see the plan as removing key controls, using fuzzy language, and failing to guarantee services keep pace, ultimately tilting the scales towards development interests over community well-being.
Okay, so that's a pretty stark contrast to the county's presentation. Now, there's another layer here. We also have analysis looking at how this draft comp plan lines up or doesn't line up with the county's other important documents.
Right. Sources 2 and 4 did this analysis, comparing the draft comp plan with the current land development code, the LDC, and the county's strategic plan. This is about potential planning document misalignments and implementation gaps.
Why is that comparison important?
Well, think of it like this. The comp plan is what's the long-term vision. The LDC is the how, the specific rules, zoning, standards that actually govern building permits day to day. The strategic plan is more about shorter-term priorities. For the whole system to work smoothly, they all need to mesh together.
And this analysis found problems.
It found several potential contradictions and gaps that could really hinder the plan's implementation. First, a big one, the development area boundary implementation gap.
We keep coming back to the DAB. What's the gap?
The draft comp plan introduces the DAB as this key tool, right? But the current LDC, the rulebook for enforcement, apparently has no provisions for actually implementing or enforcing this boundary. None.
So the main new idea in the plan doesn't have any teeth in the rules that matter on the ground.
That's what the analysis suggests. Without those LDC regulations, the DAB concept might just be, well, an idea on paper, potentially ineffective, regardless of the intent.
That seems fundamental. What else?
There's also an issue flagged with the regulatory framework for plan amendment criteria. Remember how the draft comp plan moves the specific criteria for evaluating amendments out of the plan itself and points to the LDC?
Yeah.
Well, the analysis found the current LDC doesn't actually contain comprehensive criteria for this either.
Uh-oh. So the comp plan says, look in the LDC, but the LDC cupboard is bare.
Sort of a circular reference problem, yeah.
Yeah.
This analysis says it creates uncertainty because there's a lack of clear, defined criteria for evaluating proposed changes to the comp plan.
They also found issues with timelines. Timeline and planning horizon inconsistencies.
Right. The comp plan looks out to 2050. The strategic plan is much shorter, just 2024-2029. The LDC doesn't really have a set horizon.
And the problem there is,
while they're supposed to work together, the analysis raises a concern that the strategic plan's short focus might not adequately address the really long-term goals in the 2050 comp plan, could lead to gaps as time goes on.
makes sense. What about language?
Terminology inconsistencies. Key terms apparently aren't always defined the same way or used consistently across the different documents. Like one might say enhanced conservation, another natural resource protection.
Which sounds similar, but in legal and planning terms, those small differences can matter, cause confusion, maybe conflict.
Exactly. And related to that, performance metrics misalignment. The strategic plan has measurable goals, targets, but the draft comp plan and the LDC mostly lack those kinds of quantifiable metrics.
So it's hard to tell if the rules in the LDC are actually achieving the big goals set out in the comp plan.
That's the difficulty highlighted. Finally, a potential mixed-use development standards gap. The draft comp plan adds this new objective encouraging mixed use, but the analysis suggests the current LDC might not have detailed enough standards to really guide that type of development properly.
So again, the vision is there, but the how-to rulebook might be lacking.
Leading to potentially inconsistent or ineffective implementation of mixed-use projects. That's the concern raised.
So the big picture for this analysis in sources 2 and 4 is what? That the documents aren't singing from the same hymn sheet.
Essentially, yes. While there might be a shared general direction, these specific gaps and inconsistencies could seriously get in the way of effectively implementing the 2050 comp plan. And crucially, it points out that the LDC needs significant updates to actually make new concepts like the DAB work or to handle those revised amendment criteria.
And if you connect these implementation problems back to those citizen concerns, it's kind of a perfect storm, isn't it?
It could be. These functional gaps, how the plan actually works or doesn't work, could easily worsen the very problems residents are worried about. Controlling growth, ensuring infrastructure, protecting communities. It makes the whole challenge even harder regardless of the plan's stated intentions.
It really shows how the devil is in the details and in the alignment between documents.
Huh.
Now, Source 1, the one with the citizen critiques, didn't just complain, it also offered solutions.
That's right. They proposed a set of what they call resident-friendly revisions. The aim, they say, is to offer reasonable infrastructure-first revisions that reflect resident priorities.
Trying to shift the balance back.
Seems so. They frame them as ways to, put some checks on unchecked development, restore more public oversight, and make sure infrastructure and services genuinely keep up with growth.
And the suggestions directly address the criticisms.
Many of them do, yeah. For instance, they propose keeping infrastructure review standards in the comp plan, not just shuffling them off to the LDC. They want to bring back roadway level of service traffic congestion as a mandatory reason to deny development if roads are failing.
And add school capacity as another hard limit on growth.
Exactly. Also, putting firm caps on density bonuses and tying any bonus strictly to proven existing infrastructure capacity, not just proximity.
What about the rural areas and compatibility?
They suggest closing or severely limiting those PRDs in rural zones and making compatibility reviews objective based on measurable standards with mandatory public input, not just a subjective call.
And the other big ones.
A few more stand out. Requiring a formal community impact study for larger projects, creating a citizen growth oversight board, requiring a supermajority vote, like 4 out of 5 commissioners, to approve any expansion of the DAB.
Adding more hurdles for expansion, basically.
And demanding full transparency, making all changes and red lines to the comp plan easily trackable by the public.
So how does Source 1 sum up these proposed revisions?
They argue these changes are not anti-growth. They are pro-responsibility, pro-community, and pro-planning. They basically say the county can grow, but it doesn't have to sacrifice infrastructure, transparency, or quality of life to do it. The implication is that the current draft does make those sacrifices.
Okay, so let's try to bring this all together for you, the listener. We've seen the county's draft 2050 plan. It presents this vision: structured growth, guided by infrastructure, using new tools like the development area boundary.
But we've also dug into some serious critiques, primarily from Source 1, arguing that key parts of this plan could actually weaken growth controls, let infrastructure fall further behind, push high-density development without adequate services, and rely on language that doesn't effectively protect communities or the environment.
And then there's that critical layer from Sources 2 and 4, showing potential major disconnects between this draft plan and the existing rulebooks, the LDC and strategic plan. These gaps could make actually implementing the plan effectively very difficult, maybe even counterproductive.
And it's really important to stress again, this is a draft. It was just presented May 20th. It's out there now for public review. County officials say they want feedback before it goes further. Public hearings are expected.
This is the moment for input, really. And this isn't just any update. It's the first major overhaul of the long-term plan in years, happening during a period of just intense growth and pressure in St. Johns County. The choices made here are huge.
Absolutely. These decisions will echo for decades.
Looking at all this, it's so clear that revising a comp plan, especially in a place growing like this, is just incredibly complex. You're juggling visions for the future, the hard realities of infrastructure, development economics, and what the people living there actually want for their community.
And we've seen how the same document can look very different depending on your perspective, right? And how its success hangs not just on the big ideas, but on those crucial details of implementation and whether all the different planning documents actually work together.
So as this draft plan moves forward, maybe the key question, based on everything we've explored today, is this. With the critiques about weakened controls and the identified gaps in implementation, how can the county truly achieve those stated goals of long-term, structured, infrastructure-supported growth, especially if the rules needed to make it happen aren't clear, strong, and fully aligned across the board?
That seems to be the central challenge they face. And it's a challenge many communities grappling with growth are facing right now, something to definitely keep an eye on.